I would like to thank you for the invitation. I'm happy to be here with you at today's conference. This is something that has again and again has really touched my heart, something that I've been dealing with all over my professional life. So it's participation and education. Now, well, participation, that's quite a difficult word, but participation is what I've been dealing with since the German Security Code has been launched in 2001, and there was part of the praxis of rehabilitation and participation when it comes to the education of social workers and social pedagogic workers and their effect on education. So that was something I have been dealing with for quite some time. So I started to study special pedagogics. Not sure if this still exists today, to be honest, but that's pedagogics of inclusion or whatever. But I am a teacher at a special school, and I then worked at an entity, sheltered workshop entity institution as a teacher. And actually, the right to education for everyone, so for mentally disabled persons, but also for physically disabled persons and severely disabled persons, had the chance to make use of the right to education, even though back then we did not have the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities. So then the next phase was when I was a scientific co-worker. I was responsible for the education of teachers, and then I was a lecturer at for 13 years at a different type of school, special needs school. So I was working as a social worker specialized in helping disabled persons. So that's what I was responsible for. And then at Jena University, what have I done there? Well, I offered seminars and projects on adult education or disabled adults with disabilities. So I was not just a teacher and lecturer, but I was also a founding member of the Society for the Education of Adults with Disabilities. So this is what I've been working with, what I've been dealing with. And so this was one thing I did, and then there was the practical work. So in Jena, I only had a 75 position, and I only got a 75% of the wage, and I earned the rest to the 100% by working in practical life. And what now is a part of what we see here today. And this is why it's really a topic that's close to my heart as a pedagogics person. So my point of view on participation and education always comes from this angle, even though I'm not a social worker, even though I have been working in that area at the university as well. Now, participation as a term. My impression is that in Germany, and not just today, people really like hybrid conferences, hybrid meetings, but also hybrid terms. Because if I look at the German Social Security Code 9, then let's look at the title. Here it says rehabilitation and participation. So rehabilitation is a Latin term, and then participation or having a share in. I like to define terms because I think you need defined terms in order to have an exchange with persons. If you do not have a definition, that's something I think it's quite awful. Now, why? Because why is this law not meant rehabilitation and participation? Were German people afraid of participation? Because this would be more than just having a say, co-determination. Is this why they left it? I don't know. But why didn't they say it's sort of recreation and participation? Because actually this is what rehabilitation means. That is a term coming from the legal area, and it actually means that somebody who has been charged and justified is now going to be there will be rehabilitation of this. Now, doctors do this, but what they do is rather habilitation. So schools and education and the workshops is habilitation, so bringing about a certain state. And actually, I would love to see that many of these terms are, to be clear, I would love to see them defined. And it is even more extreme in the ICF, which is the International Classification of Functioning, Disability and Health. So here we have these brackets, and there in this bracket it says having a share, so participation, but then in bracket it says having a share. And now, why is it like this? When the ICF was translated from English into German, people from Switzerland and Austria and the Germans all came together. And then the Germans said that we want to have the English term participation, but we want it to be translated as having a share. But then people from Switzerland in Swiss German said that no, that's not possible. That's not possible because in our language it means to have a share in a company, and it's not the Germany AG that we have here, and you cannot have a share in this, so that's not possible. And that's why this was the solution. So the brackets here show that it's the revenge on by Swiss people. So I'm not really sure if that's true or not, but that's what we could think of. So hybrid terms. That is something that I'm struggling with a little bit. But having a share, I mean, Mr. Schmachtenberg was talking about having a share all the time. Now, what does that actually mean? It's not really defined within the law. That's just so everyone can have his or her own understanding of it. Now, look up the term on the internet. So you read having a share and participation everywhere, but what does it actually mean? Only in ICF it is determined as being involved in situations of life. So being involved in situations of life. Now, what I am wondering is the following thing. If I go to the federal legislation on participation, and if I go to paragraph 1, it is talking about full and efficient participation in the society. But what does full and efficient mean? As I said before, I love to see definitions of terms, because if I talk about something and if I have a definition, then I can make my point really clear. So, full participation means that people with disabilities are involved in all situations of life of the society. So here it is only talked about people with disabilities, and this is something I don't like to see, because having a disability is not a characteristic of someone. Even though in the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, well, it's written there everywhere. I mean, everyone has a certain disability and impairment, right? I'm almost 80 years old, and you see that there's certain impairments that I have just because of my age. Well, can't move around the way I would love to, but well, I mean, being involved, people with disabilities, being involved, or with impairments, being involved in all situations of life of the society. So it's not just work, but when it comes to living, spare time, and also in education. So those are the areas of life and situations of life that I have been in, or that I'm in. And that's also important for people with impairments or disabilities. Now, when it comes to efficient participation, then this is about that people with disabilities are generating certain effects in those situations of life. So we just heard that it's not a mercy, so inclusion is not a mercy. What does inclusion actually mean? And, well, so I'm not going to talk more about those terms that I'm actually not working with. But again, it's about full and efficient participation. Now, if people with disabilities have problems to generate or bring about this effect of their participation, well, then they have to be empowered to be able to do that. And this actually brings us to the topic of education or qualification, even though, as a, well, pedagogic specialist. I would like to talk rather about education, because someone who deals with labor and work, then it's more about qualification, I think, but it's more or less the same. So the right to education would be the next level, so to speak. Now, if someone with a disability, so normally disabled or impaired persons, everyone has the right to education. That's in line with our security code, but or fundamental law. But having the right and being granted this right is something else, right? Those are two different things. So education and school education, I think that this is something that has been established, but well, everyone has the right to education, but there is one specific area, and this is especially true for people working in the workshops. They do not have the right to vocational education. So there is no diploma that they will be given after this education. So there is no a true vocational or professional education, job-related education. And I think that this is a type of discrimination that has going on for like forever, and apparently no one is really caring about this or cares about this, except me. So the right to education. The UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities, Article 24. Oh, and by the way, in Germany we do not have this convention here. It's called a UN agreement, UN convention. So in German it's just called UN convention or agreement on the rights of people with disabilities. So they sort of try to make use of the actual language that it's translated in. But, well, now, the contracting parties obliged to acknowledge the right to education for all the people, all types of education, long life education, everything is determined in here. And amongst others, by this, the right is supposed to be implemented so that an integrative education system is established, even though in the English version it says an inclusive education system. So, again, here, Austria, Germany, and also Liechtenstein said that we are going to translate this with integrative instead of inclusive. Well, but no one knows why. Now here's something to be added. So in addition to this, the contracting parties ensure that proper preparations are made so that the people can really live up to their right to education. So preparations for all the individuals, which might eventually bring us to the digital world, so digital education, because it is a proper preparation for persons in order to have the chance to acquire certain things. And those persons are to be supported, of course. I think that's an important point here. So many other things are mentioned, so inclusive schools or whatever. But, well, as a schoolman, I have my, well, personal opinion on this, but I'm not going to talk about this right now. Now, here's the question. If education is taking place, in fact, where would this go to? So participation means being involved in two areas of life and to be active or to become active in these areas of life. So being involved is a state, but I am active within the state. So I am active, I can do something. And in order to become active, you need to be capable of becoming active. You need to be able to act, capable of acting. And this brings us back to the question of the action competence. So what is the objective? Later on, we're going to hear more about the needs and desires there are on part of people with disabilities towards the institutions. But in fact, and we just discussed it before, so theory and practice, well, at the very beginning of my studies, I read in a book, and in this book it was said that Practice without theory is not responsible, but practice with theory without practice is a crime. So you need to have the both things together. And everyone who does something, who is active, has a theory in his mind. So I have a theoretical basis if I do something, if I'm active. So that's the action competence. And this action competence can be embedded into a model that starts with what follows now. So I need resources for my action, for my acting, which means that I need to know what I want to do, I need to be able to do this, and I need to have the proper, mindset. Do you know someone who wants to do something and they know how to do something, but they do not have no motivation at all to do something? Does that exist? Well, my wife says yes. She knows one who's like this. So that's the actual content that education aims at. So wanting to do something, knowing how to do something, and then a mindset. So all this together leads to the competence, which is the ability and readiness or willingness to deliver performances, so to become active. So it's the ability and the willingness. So it's not just enough to be able to do something, but someone just doesn't want to do it. So others are willing to do everything but are not able of. Well, that's a different story. So in general, all in all, then this ends up in performance, which is delivering a performance. So a performance that you deliver is visible because you cannot see the competence. And I think that a person can do this, but I can't prove it. I can only prove it if once this performance has been delivered. So that's why I'd like to talk about performance here. So resource competence performance model. Now this brings us to the person with an action competence or just a competence. But yeah, that's about the action competence here. And now the question is, what has to happen to allow for the proper preparation so that this person is actually able to be active, to act? And now there is a new combination of terms, and again, that's a hybrid one. So that's the competence hybrid approach. What does that mean? In the beginning, it starts with someone who is here, and within the framework of education, this person is supposed to acquire resources, so knowledge, skills, and has to have a mindset so that this person can act. So as to develop this competence or acquires this competence, so it's not just developing it, but also acquiring it or being given it. And this action competence can be divided into subject-related competence, methodological competence, social competence, and individual competence. Now, if you deal with this in theory and if you read books, you will find many different competence models. Others have four, some have four, others only three, others combine the things. And I love to have things clear, and this is why I came up with this model here. I have those competence areas. And then it is about the performance again. So the person has to act, and the question is what has to happen so that this person can acquire the necessary resources within or thanks to education. Now, this brings us to the next step. So there's the environment, and we need to have education in the environment. So the personnel and person in charge of education have to be qualified, so they also need to have the knowledge, the skills, and the mindset in order to impart knowledge in the end, which then brings us into the shaping or design competence. Here we have the competence to design and shape processes and structures, materials, and also support. And if a person has all of these shaping competencies here, then the performance will become visible because the persons with disabilities will then be involved in their educational structures. They will be supported and everything they need. So that's what is the result of this. So the topic that I am currently dealing with is to look at this design or this design competence. And for the colleagues working with the sheltered workshops, we also, in sheltered workshop, there is a new publication that includes the diBa project and other many practical things. I mean, you know that Mr. Grampp is a great or someone who loves theories, but I am represented in this book as well, and it is about this very approach. So the competence hybrid approach. We do not call this a model because it's not a model. I'm not as popular to call it a model, so it's just an approach. And, well, oh, there it is again. So this leads to the fact that the corresponding preparations are made so that someone is now able to learn. So the processes are to be or have to be carried out. The structures have to be designed in a way so that they promote learning, that they allow for learning, and, well, that everything is there. And then this brings us to material competence, which brings us to the digital approach. That's a different thing here. But actually, I am someone who is, well, I'm a fan of digital media, but I need the people. I need to have an exchange in person. I need contact. And that is why I rejected to give online seminars. I'm not doing this. I have to have the people in the same room as I am. People start smiling at me, they nod, and that's it. I love that. So now this brings me to my last slide. I would like to thank you for listening.